Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our latest live event from the Great Exhibition Road Festival's Explore at Home series. My name is James. I work in the public engagement team at Imperial College London, one of the festival partners. Throughout Explore at Home, we are investigating the convergence of creative and artistic disciplines with the worlds of science and engineering and technology. For those who know their Exhibition Road history, in particular, why you have science centres like Imperial next door to the V&A and the Royal College of Art, you'll know that that type of cross-disciplinary collaboration is kind of what we're all about on Exhibition Road. Today, we're going to be exploring a day in the life of two impressive, interesting individuals with strong connections to Exhibition Road. As you will have seen from the title of this event, which is below me, we will be hearing from a brain imaging scientist and an audio-visual artist. That might seem a slightly odd pairing to bring together for a lunchtime chat. However, there is logic to all this. Our guests were brought together last year for the Great Exhibition Road Festival as part of a public engagement project called Art Times Science, which aimed to artistically help the public make sense of research into new medical imaging technologies. Later on in the event, we'll be hearing and seeing more of the results of this collaboration. However, this is a day in the life talk. So first we need to find out a little bit about these interesting individuals as individuals, including what they get up to on a day-to-day basis in their exciting careers. So without any further ado, let me introduce our guests. Carlos Cueto is part of the Centre for Doctoral Training in Smart Medical Imaging, which is jointly run by King's College London and Imperial College London. There, he is developing faster, cheaper and safer ways to image the brain using ultrasound that could be made available to first responders to major incidents in the future. And joining us today is Melanie King, a PhD candidate at the Royal College of Art. She is also co-director of Supercollider, an independent creative agency that explores science from a pop cultural standpoint. Thank you so much for joining us, Carlos and Melanie. Just before we get started, I wanted to remind you all watching at home on YouTube that this is an interactive event, so please do send us your questions and thoughts. Because we're talking about brain scanning today, we thought it might be quite interesting to hear from you on what comes to mind when you think of ultrasound, which is the sort of scientific technique we're going to be talking about. And also, what would you do with a recording of the sound of your own brain? Any creative suggestions, welcome, put them in the comments and we'll read them out. My colleagues, Holly, she's working away in the background monitoring the YouTube chat and will be passing your comments on to me to read out and put to our guests. I would just ask everyone to be considerate of each other when you are posting. We want to create a welcoming space for this conversation, so let's not disrupt the experience for others. So if that's all understood, I'm going to get started with a couple of questions of my own. In fact, I have a series of sentences for Carlos, for you and Melanie to finish off, which I think will hopefully give our viewers a little bit of a taste of a better understanding about you and how you came to this collaboration. So if we're okay to get started, the first sentence I wanted to finish. We heard a little bit in my blurb about where you work and what you do, but I wonder, when you're with friends or family, what do you say when they ask what I do for a living? So this could be friends in the pub or on a Zoom meeting, or when you get introduced to a new family member at a party. When you get confronted with someone who doesn't have an artistic or a science background, what is your response to what do I do for a living? Maybe Carlos, can I come to you first?
Yeah. So hi, my name's Carlos. Thank you for the question, James. So when my friends ask me what I do for a living, I usually would go with something along the lines of that I'm trying to get the same technology that we now use to image babies in the womb to image the brains of patients, and that we're hoping that this technology is going to be a game changer, mostly for stroke patients and third world countries.
Amazing. Is there any interesting follow-up questions from that, Carlos, or is that are people satisfied with that response usually?
It depends on how keen they are on knowing more about the science. Sometimes at this point they've heard enough, and that's it. So it depends a bit on the person, I guess.
Brilliant. And Melanie, in response to that question, does an artist who's interested in science, does that suffice, or do you have another go-to phrase to describe what your career?
I would usually say I'm an experimental photographer who works in the darkroom, but also experiments with different types of science.
Wow, great! Works in the darkroom is it's an intriguing phrase. I like it. Brilliant. So I've got some quick fire sentences that I hope you can all complete for me. I'll come to you, Carlos, first, and then to you, Melanie, afterwards with each of them. So number one, a typical day at work involves. Carlos, go.
So most of my job really entails finding those obstacles that we need to overcome to get this technology to work on patients. So what I would normally do is I would try to figure out what those problems are and then try to figure solutions to those problems. And what I would normally do is I would create simulations first about what this problem is and how I can solve it, and then I would try to reproduce it in a controlled environment in a lab. And I would then go back and forth between creating experiments, simulating them, and then analyzing the data that I get from those experiments to try and figure out how we can figure out this hurdles along the way.
And Melanie, I guess as you might have worked in a series of projects across so a typical day might be harder to characterize, but what sort of things do you get up to in your day-to-day work?
So usually I'm out in the field, whether that's kind of taking photographs or making sound recordings and kind of exploring different landscapes, or I'm in the studio and I'm experimenting with different kind of processes and thinking of new ideas.
Brilliant. Okay. Next one, the best piece of advice I have been given is, Carlos?
So it's probably from a supervisor of mine many years ago who told me that in science one should always try to take the road less traveled because that's where real scientific impact and societal impact can be made, and that sort of stuck with me.
That's lovely. Yeah, thank you. And Melanie, any advice from any mentors or inspirations down the years?
Yeah, I've had some advice recently, which was not to limit myself. And I think that's really important in terms of thinking of new ways to experiment or trying new ideas and processes.
Okay, yeah, great. I think we can all adopt that in our sort of day-to-day careers, definitely. Yeah. Okay, next sentence. My favorite part of my job is, Carlos?
So it's probably there's a moment when you're doing research where you come to a realization of some sort, and then at some point you realize that you're probably the only person in the world who possesses that tiny bit of new scientific knowledge, and that's great. Actually, that's probably this I love the most about my job.
It must be amazing for that brief moment until you publish a paper or share it with a colleague. You might be the only person who's worked something out. So I think that sort of privileged position must be quite heartwarming when you have those moments. Melanie?
My answer is remarkably similar, actually.
Right.
So when I'm working with something in the studio and it's a process that I've not tried or someone else hasn't tried and it works, that's kind of the best feeling ever.
I love that. I love the way that we're all about where we can find similarities and commonalities between the arts and sciences. So it's nice that there's a similar answer to that question. We've had a couple of questions in through the chat. I'm going to come to those. I've got a couple more sentences and then I'll come to those. But yeah, please do keep sending those in. I'll come to those in sort of 5 minutes or so. My next sentence. My job would be a lot easier if, Carlos, what would make your life, your career easier?
Well, it would probably be if we could actually devote all our time to science and not have to write things like grants. What happens is, for us people who are not lecturers, our salaries depend on grant money, and those grants need to be written, and that takes a huge amount of time that we're not actually doing science that we should be doing. So that's probably the thing I would scrap entirely.
Yeah, I think I was certainly surprised when I first started working with scientists, like actually how much of their day is actually spent doing the sort of thinking and that goes into research or the planning of experiments is much smaller than people imagine, and there's a whole load of other stuff that goes into their day-to-day lives, and sometimes it's fitting the research in around all those other responsibilities. Melanie, what would make your job slightly easier?
My answer is pretty much exactly the same. So I spend a lot of time writing funding applications and doing admin things, and it would be great if I didn't have to do that, because I could focus more on making the creative types of work.
Okay, another similarity, great. Next one, when I talk about my work, people are always surprised by. Is there anything, Carlos, is there anything that people are always, raises their eyebrows when you talk about what you do for a living?
So mostly it's about how complicated it is to get a brain scan right now. Most people think it's just a very straightforward thing. You go to the hospital, you get a brain scan, that's it. But reality is it's not that easy. Most methods we use right now, they're either dangerous to the patient, or the waits are really, really long. And that's if you're lucky and you live in a first world country. If you live in a more deprived area, you're never going to get one of those scans done, ever.
Right. Okay. So even in our current health sort of system in UK hospitals, the what's involved in getting a brain scan is a complicated, long, drawn out process. Is that right?
Yeah. Because you usually try not to get a CT to people, which is one of the options, because that involves radiation that can cause problems for patients. The other option is getting an MRI, but MRI machines are huge. They need a room just for that, and they're also very, very expensive. So what happens is most hospitals, they have one MRI scan at most. Sometimes they got a couple if they're very big hospitals, but in general it's just one here in the UK. And that means if you've got a whole lot of patients to scan, there's going to be inevitably a queue of people, and wait times are going to grow.
Yeah, well, yeah, because you see on like ER and those hospital dramas, it's like they stick those charts up on that bright wall, and it's like God, we've scanned his brain, no problem. It seems like later that day they can just get the scan and the results back, but obviously the sort of administrative and the sort of the infrastructure required to do that is a bit more difficult in real life. Yes, I guess that was what inspired you to look at some of the research that we're going to talk about a bit later.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, over to you, Melanie. What are people surprised by when you talk about your work and in your career and some of the pieces you produce?
Usually it's the diversity of the processes that I use. So I use whatever process fits the idea. And for example, I've worked with things like meteorite dust. I've worked using sunlight to make a photographic image, but also, as you know from this piece, I also work in audio visual. So yeah.
How did you use meteorite dust?
I actually worked with the Royal School of Mines to break down some meteorites into dust and then use them as a mixture to go in with ink, and made some meteorite imbued ink prints.
Incredible. I didn't know. So the Royal School of Mines is a department at Imperial, for those who don't know. It's where our geologists and planetary scientists work, and some paleontologists. I didn't know we had so much meteorite sample to go around that we could. I guess it was only a small proportion of the meteorite was used for this. Yes, it was a small proportion of meteorites, and there were meteorites that I'd sourced as well. All right. Well, if you bring your own sample, then I think they can't really mine, can they? How did you find? Where did you get your meteorites from? Did you buy them online or find them on the ground? Yeah, I bought them online, and then they verified them, and we made them into dust together. It's amazing, yeah. I think we've got a link to your. Is that artwork on your website? So I think we'll share that in the chat function. We'll share a link to Melanie's website so that people at home can have a look at that. Did they tell you where the meteorite came from? Like what type of meteorite it was?
Yeah, I have that information as well. It was kind of with the sale of the meteorites themselves.
Oh, right, okay. Yeah. Okay, and then the final question sentence from me, and then I'll come to a couple of the questions that people have asked, is a sort of future-looking one, not like in terms of your individual careers. So, the sentence is, I hope in 10 years' time I can say, Carlos, what are you hoping you'll be able to say in 10 years' time when you get introduced to another random member of your family or new friend of a friend at a pub?
Well, I hope I can say that we've managed to get this technology to patients and that it's helping people and we're making an impact.
Brilliant. Yeah. And to you, Melanie, what are your aspirations for the next decade?
I'd love to work on more art and science projects, particularly with places like NASA or the European Space Agency, and learn a lot more about space technology and things like that.
Brilliant. Okay. So I'm going to come to a couple of questions that we've had sent in by some of our viewers. So we had a question from Steve, which I guess can go to both of you, which is, what is the most fascinating thing you have seen? So I guess let's focus it on in terms of things you've seen in your day-to-day career rather than more broadly than that. But Carlos, you want to go first? What's the most interesting thing you've seen in the lab or in your day-to-day work?
Hard to pinpoint, but probably it's when we've done experiments with people, with ourselves usually, and we get ultrasound transducers around our heads, and we see how the signals change when we move them around, and it's a very fascinating thing, right? Seeing how sound is something you can't really see. It's going through your brain, and you've seen it on the other side on the screen of the computer, and that's really something. Brilliant.
Melanie, any? I mean, looking at creating meteorite art sounds incredible. But is there any particular? Has your career taken you to any interesting vistas or any special places that were amazing to look at?
One of the most amazing things that I've seen is when I collaborated with this scientist called Simon Park, who's a biologist. And we used microscopes to look at silver nitrate crystallizing through the microscope. And that was incredibly fascinating because you could see the material responding to light in real time. But also having seen kind of the sun through a telescope is pretty amazing as well, because you can see the coronal mass ejections and the sunspots on the surface of the sun.
Yeah, I love those ones where you see that really textured surface of the sun. I don't know through what type of lights you're looking at it, but yeah, the fact that you can see that from I think it's an expensive piece of kit, but you can see that from, in theory, someone's back garden. You can see a solar flare or a coronal mass ejection. That sort of stuff's amazing to me. Yeah, brilliant. We have a couple of questions in which are sort of more specifically to do with brains and brainwaves. So I'm going to put them to you, Carlos, initially. Melanie, feel free to join in if you've learned anything that might add to the responses to this. So we had a question from Miguel, who asked, how does the reading of brainwaves actually work? How do you detect them? So I don't know, Carlos, if you want to talk about how we do it traditionally or how you're looking at doing it differently, but either of those would be great to hear.
So in this case, what we're doing is not really reading brainwaves. What we're doing is using sound waves to interrogate the brain and see how it looks. Mm-hmm. So what you would normally do if you want to figure out what the brain waves are is you would use this sort of scalp patches that you've probably seen on films, and you get those to record electric fields and see where the waves are moving. But that's slightly different from what we're trying to achieve here.
Okay, so what approach are you taking, or what is the end result of what sort of maps are you building of the brain then, and what are you using to collect that data?
So the final goal is getting an image of the structure of the brain more than the function of the brain. So the idea is figuring out where things are. So what's grey matter, what's white matter, whether there's something that shouldn't be there. Is there a tumor, or is there a clogged somewhere, and so figure out things that are structurally present in the brain. And the way we do that in this case is using sound waves, which we propagate through the brain. So we emit sound waves on one side of someone's head, and then we record them on the other side, and we see how that looks, and based on that we get our images.
In terms of the equipment, is it would it be familiar to sort of a sound engineer in other, like, is it something that emit a transmitter and a receiver at either side of the brain, or what sort of equipment do you use to emit and to sound waves and then pick them up on the other side?
Yeah, well, that's basically it. We've got an emitter on one side and a receiver on the other, and then we've got thousands of them. So we've got many emitters, many receivers. In this case, because everything is underwater, right? It's not air. We use slightly different equipment from that of a sound engineer. We use a special type of sensors and emitters that are used for underwater sound.
Okay. So in terms of the sort of patient experience, we've all seen the MRI scans where someone gets sort of lays down and reversed into this quite scary looking large white box. What do you envisage that the final experience might be for the patients, or the person getting their brain scanned in this particular setup?
So we, at this time at least, we're aiming for something a lot less oppressive, probably. So it should be something like a very big helmet, something that surrounds your head, right? Or the upper part of your head up to about this high. And then it's closed here by a flexible membrane, right? So it's only the upper part of your brain that's covered by a sort of big bowl, which is filled with water, warm water. It's not.
Oh, nice.
Shouldn't be cool, which is nice. And then and that's it basically. So we fit the membrane around the head. We fill it with water, make a scan, get the water out, get the membrane out again, and that's it. So there's no tunnel or anything surrounding the full body or anything like that.
We had a really nice comment from Lynn about her own personal experience of MRIs, and I think she's making the case for a new approach, or helping make the case, I guess, for a new approach, Carlos. So she says, "I've had 2 MRIs, very noisy. I'd love to see my thoughts transcribed into shape and color and sound. Very imaginary, I know, but a record of the immaterial internal reality and quite unique." Well, interesting. So a case for a new approach to brain scanning, and also a potential idea for you, Melanie, in terms of how maybe brainwaves could be turned into something visual there. I don't know, Melanie, if you've when you first approached this project or started working with Carlos, had you had any experience? I hope not. Maybe getting your brain scanned, or had you come across this as an issue or something that might be better improved?
I've never had a brain scan before. So when I went to Carlos's lab, that was the first time I'd really known about this kind of technology. Yeah,
neither have I. So if anyone watching has had their brain scan and wants to tell us a little bit, like Lynn has, a little bit about their experience, it'd be great to hear about that in the chat. Please do post in there, and we'll read them out. When you talked about the structure of the brain, Carlos, I guess that's linked to more pathological or more sort of physical health issues, rather than, so Sudhir asked about things like mental illness and the correlations between that and brain structure. I guess that's not the sort of, well, I'm inferring that's not the sort of thing that might be able to be picked up from the structure that you're looking at with this type of technique. Is that correct?
Well, the thing is, we don't really know, right?
Right.
So in the case of mental illness, we really know so little about the actual substrate of that in the brain and how it emerges, what's the mechanism by which these things happen, that we don't know whether we will be able to see something. Is there a change in the brains of patients who are suffering a mental illness? We don't really know. So I guess that's something that we'll need to figure out once we get this technology to neuroscientists who will be looking at this kind of thing.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, okay. Yeah, really interesting. Okay, so we're going to move on now and talk a little bit about the Art Time Science project and this that brought Melanie and Carlos together. But yeah, anyone watching at home, if you still have questions about these guys as individuals, about their careers, about brain scanning technologies, or about an artist who works with scientists and how Melanie got into her career and the things she's worked on, please do continue to post them in the chat, and I'll interrupt our discussion about Art Time Science to ask them, or maybe I'll come to them at the end and we'll do a quick roundup. So yeah, do keep posting those questions. But yeah, I would like to talk a little bit now about the project you've worked on together. So Art Time Science is a collaboration between the Centre for Doctoral Training in Smart Medical Imaging and the Royal College of Art. So yeah, you can see why Melanie and Carlos were involved. The organisers described the project as an experiment into what can happen when artists and scientists collaborate in order to open up conversations around how science and technology are revolutionising modern medicine and shaping the future of healthcare. You two were brought together as part of the project to develop new exhibits that explore research in medical imaging. Initially, the plan was for physical exhibits, but obviously the reality of COVID-19 and lockdown, and we had to cancel our 2020 festival, means the project shifted or pivoted in some design speak. So you had to adapt to creating an innovative digital work. The result was Art Time Science. The results can be found at arttimescience.co.uk. So that's artxscience.co.uk. I think Chloe will post a link in the chat so you can go see not just this project, but a couple of other projects. It's actually a showcase. The website is a showcase of 4 fantastic and engaging exhibits. And also there's a space for visitors to share their thoughts on the research. So there's a place where you can post comments and thoughts and they get displayed so other people can see them. So it's a really lovely interactive website where you can play around with art and you can share your thoughts and experiences. So I do very much recommend everyone to check that out. Briefly, before we're going to show some of the results of that project, the ones that Melanie and Carlos worked on in a second. But first, I was going to ask a couple of questions about your thoughts and experience entering this collaboration. So, Carlos, in terms of your experience working with an artist, was this the first time for you? What were your sort of preconceptions about being paired with Melanie or an artist generally, and what did you think the experience might be like?
So yeah, it was my first experience with collaborating with an artist on something like this. So most preconceptions were actually not about the work itself, but mostly about how I could get my work into something that could be artistic in some way, and I wasn't very sure whether that would be possible at all. But then we got talking. Melanie talked about her past experience working with scientists, and that sort of got things going a bit. And I started to think a bit differently about how my work could translate into something that would be interesting from an artistic perspective. But yeah, I was interested in figuring out ways in which I could communicate with the public in a more organic way, less hard, I guess. And that was an important motivator to get this going.
Brilliant. And you, Melanie, I mean, you've worked a lot in sort of that astronomy side of things, but you did mention the biologist that you collaborated with. I don't know if you've worked with sort of neuroscientists or brain imaging technology or that side of science and technology before, but what were your preconceptions about working with Carlos before meeting him and starting the work on the project?
I actually have worked with a neuropharmacologist before, but that's quite a different experience. And it was very much looking into things like electron microscope scanning of specimens. So this was completely different. But in terms of this project, I was completely amazed by the research that Carlos is doing. First of all, just the use of ultrasound and the possibility that an MRI machine could be made portable is amazing, because that's going to have such a massive impact on society and health. So I just found that absolutely fascinating. And then just to learn more about ultrasound itself, it's not something I've had much experience with, but yeah, it's just incredibly interesting.
Great, thank you. So we've had just before we showed some of the results of this collaboration, we had a couple of really nice comments and questions. So Melissa has shared her own experience of an MRI, which she described as a very frightening experience. She talked about the connotations with MRI machines and cancer and tumor. Now, I know there is a radiation element to MRI. Carlos, is that something that people should be nervous or scared about?
No, so MRI is extremely safe. There's obviously certain safety concerns as with any machine, but with a trained radiologist, MRI is extremely safe. It has no long-term effects on health. It won't produce cancer or anything like that. So MRI is very safe. It is a very frightening experience, and it can be very noisy, very claustrophobic. So that's a bad thing from it, but you won't get any side effects from it.
Okay. We had another comment from Steve, who he said he found the experience very noisy, but he had a coping technique was he tried not to panic by thinking of music which was in tune with the noise, which meant heavy metal rather than classical, which luckily for Steve, he says he loves, so he's obviously a heavy metal fan, so that helped calm him down during the experience. And Lola mentioned that she can understand how the experience can be claustrophobic and maybe even frightening for some. So I think, yeah, there definitely seems to be understanding of, from a sort of a patient experience perspective, sort of putting aside the availability and economics and other and sort of time to get brain scans back for medical doctors. So putting that to the side for a second, just thinking it from a patient experience perspective, there seems to be sort of a rationale for looking at other approaches. So yeah, I think that's really interesting. We had a question which I don't necessarily understand, but maybe Carlos, you will do, from someone called Bouquet, or Buket, who asked, "Are you investigating networks in the brain like DMN?" Carlos.
So we aren't as specifically, but we collaborate. I have to say, I'm not entirely sure what that stands for. But I'm assuming it's a certain network within the brain, or a certain area of neurons. So we work on the technical side of getting the images through, but we collaborate with neurologists at UCL who are looking at how these images could carry information about different networks, different parts of the brain, and pathologies that affect them. So we are working on that. No, not me personally. Okay.
I think DMN, we've been told, is default mode network, but yeah, maybe that's something that maybe the UCL team might be able to look at in terms if find this type of imaging, this type of data useful in terms of looking at those potentially. Cool. Okay, so I think we're going to have a chance to look at the results of this collaboration that Melanie and Carlos worked on, which I think is quite exciting. So I'm going to ask you, Carlos, to start. So there's two parts of this project, or two outputs, I guess, in a sense, which will, I guess, hopefully, if we can ever come and do this in person, might come together in some really sort of lovely, immersive way. But we're going to separate them out slightly for the purposes of this event. So I think I'm going to hand over to you, Carlos, to show one of the interactive visualization elements of it, and I think you can play around with it a little bit and show people in real time how it works. While you're doing that, if you could talk a little bit about where the idea came from, what you were looking to do, and what people are actually looking at as you're playing around with it, that would be great.
Yeah. So in this case, so what we have is here an interactive visualization of what should be the surface of a pond, basically, of water, in which there's sound waves traveling through it, and we can interact with it by creating waves in different places and see how they interact as they move through the pond. Now, the idea for this piece came because, well, first of all, as I said, I work a lot with simulations and creating visualizations of how different physical effects happen as a way of figuring out solutions for different problems. So what we wanted to do was to figure out ways in which we could make sound, which is something invisible, immaterial in a way, something tangible, something that people could see and understand in a more visual way, which is a lot easier for us to understand as humans. And this is where it came from, right? So if we think of sound as a wave that travels through the surface of a pond when we throw a rock in it, we can pretty much see how sound is going to behave if we excite it somewhere. So we have an emitter somewhere, and the sort of ripples on the pond are what's happening, even though we can't see it. So if we then introduce some object, and in this case, here we've got a skull, what happens is that sound, unlike light, can travel through these objects. So we can't see through them because they're opaque, but sound doesn't have a problem going through them. And that's what happens if there's absolutely nothing inside the brain. But if instead we had some objects in there, then we would see how sound patterns change, how they start moving around, how they change direction, change speed. And by recording sound on the other side, what happens then is that we can figure out with our algorithms how these objects are positioned within the brain. And with these objects, we are talking about things like a blood clot or a hemorrhage or a tumor somewhere. And by looking at how patterns of sound are distorted by this object, we can figure out where these objects are located.
Great. Thank you so much. Incredible. So if people go on the Art Time Science website and go to the Ultra project, you can play around with that yourself. So I think the link has been posted in the chat. So yeah, please have a look at that. During that, I wondered, Carlos, during that sort of whole process of creating that, whether as a sort of a healthcare technology researcher, did you think about why it's important for scientists and engineers to help the sort of public understand the latest developments in healthcare technology? Did it give you, and maybe why visual mediums or interactive mediums like that can help in that regard?
Well, I think it's important because science and engineering in general, and in particular healthcare science and engineering, it doesn't, or it shouldn't just happen for the sake of it, but because they bring benefit to our society. And communicating science to people is a way to sort of ground the societal impact of what we're doing and bring it into perspective. I think it also has to do with the economic side of it, because at the end of the day, is governments who are the biggest funders of this sort of science, and then by extension taxpayers who are through their taxes paying this research. And I think establishing these channels of communication with society as a whole is important in that sense as well. And I think also finding ways in which you can make the science appealing, get your message across is relevant, and visual media is a good way to do that, I believe.
Yeah, totally agree. Yeah, I think you've achieved that with that particular interactive piece. So yeah, congratulations on creating that. Melanie, I'm going to come to your part of the project now. So yours is a sort of a soundtrack in a sense, or an audio piece. So we're going to be able to play a little bit of it in a second. Before we do so, I wonder if you could maybe introduce it or talk about where the inspiration come from, where the origin of the actual sounds themselves came from, and what sort of your thought process was, and then we'll listen to a little bit of it afterwards.
So the piece was made by getting some numerical data from Carlos, and he gave me data which had the wavelength height and the wavelength length, and I use this within a computer programming software with Steve Aishman, who was able to create an audio file. And then the audio file itself was quite high-pitched and squeaky, so I modified it using Logic to make it sound a little bit less offensive to the ears. And I was particularly hoping to achieve to make the data seem more appealing and to make it more tangible to the senses, because obviously this numerical data isn't something that you can easily interact with, but if you can make that audible and make it possible for people to hear it, it makes it more accessible.
Well, hopefully you can hear a little bit of this. So Veronica, if you can bring up that's SoundCloud. So if we all stay silent, I think it helps if we're all a bit quiet. We can hear a couple of seconds of the piece, Ultrasound of the Brain. So yeah, did everyone hear that? Did that come through okay? Oh, okay. Sorry, that doesn't seem to have worked. But if you go to the art assignment, we'll post the link again in the chat. If you go to that, and there's the listen to Ultra is the option, and you can listen to the piece by Melanie as it's hosted on the SoundCloud account. So yeah, feel free to have a listen to that as we continue to talk. So I wonder, is the idea, Melanie, that you think that people, if we're ever able to sort of bring the piece into the real world and maybe have it at a future, hopefully fingers crossed, a future Great Exhibition Road Festival, how do you imagine the two components coming together into sort of an immersive experience?
The original idea that we had for the project was to make an installation using the Schlieren effect. So that would be using ultrasound technology and a light, a lens and a mirror to show how waves propagate. And we would show that through a physical interaction, a video and images. But in terms of showing this piece, I imagine that we would have the computer program and the sound playing in response to that.
Right, Carlos, how do you envisage it? And what do you think what type of experience do you think people will have walking into that sort of space, and what do you hope people to be thinking as they sort of play with your interactive element and sort of are immersed in that soundscape?
Yeah, so I hope probably people can get a more intuitive understanding of the physics of what's going on. So get to see in a way how sound behaves, even though we can't see it, and how those properties of sound can be useful for us when we try and find images of the brain.
So we're in the sort of final stage of this discussion. So if you do have any questions, anyone at home, feel free to send them in, and we'll put them to our guests. So we had a question that I'm just going to scroll down to. Where has it gone? Sorry. A question from Steve, who asked, do you expect, I guess this, which I guess refers to your sort of approach or technique, Carlos, do you expect this to be helpful in understanding more about dementia, or is the brain too tangled up for it to work in this particular aspect?
Well, I personally hope so, but it's hoping. I'm not entirely sure whether that will come to happen or not. But I hope this is not just something that we use to diagnose people, but also it can be used by neuroscientists to further our understanding of the brain and get to know more about where pathologies like dementia arise and how we can treat them appropriately.
Okay. And we had another question from Yashwant, who asked, if I move my fingers, do you really see changes in my cerebellum? I assume that's part of the brain. So can you, in terms of the movement of our physical bodies, do you see the corresponding parts of brains light up, or networks of brains activate when we move our bodies or move parts of our fingers in Yashwant's question?
Yeah, sure. So what happens is there's an area of the brain called the cortex, which is somewhere around in this region, where the movement and sensation of the body is located, and there's a spatial correspondence between parts of your body and parts of the brain. So there's a small area that accounts for your right hand, and then a small area that is your left foot, and things like that. So there's and those are perfectly mapped. So you could figure out the spot and then tap that person there, and they would feel something on a finger or on a lip or whatever, right?
I wondered, if either of you have any questions for each other. I don't know if Melanie, if you had any questions for Carlos about the experience of his research, I guess, working in this area, or the project, whatever, really.
Yeah, I'd like to ask how your research has changed your perspective on other areas of your life or world understanding.
Well, I don't know. Not entirely sure. Probably it's given me a different perspective on what goes into getting an image out of someone's body, really. So when you go to a hospital, you've got something like a broken arm or pain somewhere, and then you get an image. It all seems so straightforward, but at the end of the day, it isn't. And I think it's important that people understand that, and as consumers or as users of public health, we should be aware of those challenges.
So with a question from Lucy Thomas, how did you guys actually get into this type of work? So I think this is less about this particular project and more about your career. So maybe I could come to each of you in turn. Carlos, do you want to start off talking about how you got into looking at brain scanning, brain imaging technologies?
Sure, yeah. So I've always been interested in the medical side of engineering, I guess. So it was sort of a natural choice. And then I was interested in the brain because I feel it's probably one of the last frontiers of human knowledge, in a way. We probably know a lot more about the subatomical world or galaxies and the sun than we know about our own brains, which are much closer to us. And so figuring out ways in which I could expand that knowledge is a bit what motivated me to go into this field.
And was there what sort of educational path in terms of undergraduate degrees and things like that did you take to get to where you are now? So
I did an undergraduate in electronics engineering, which doesn't have a lot to do with it. But at the time in Spain, there weren't really any degrees on bioengineering or medical engineering or anything like that. So I sort of did that. And then after a while, I figured I was really passionate about something else, really. It was medical engineering that really moved me. And I moved to London, and I started working on it. I sort of figured out a way to get into this PhD, and then I started working on this topic.
Right. I love your previous answer about one of the last frontiers of science. I think sometimes we can take for granted how amazing, in a sense, that thing that sits between our ears is as a sort of a feat of, natural engineering, I guess, in a sense. And think about it as one of the most the most complicated thing we know of in the entire universe sits between each of our ears. It's a humbling sort of thing to think about that we sort of take for granted a little bit. Melanie, in terms of your own career, how did you get to where you are now? What was your route? I know I mentioned your being at the RCA, but yeah, where did it all start?
So I've always been interested in science, particularly space, as I mentioned before. But I did a bachelor's in fine art at Leeds College of Art, and then one of the biggest, most important things for moving forward was doing my master's in art and science at St Martin's, where we did the residency that I mentioned before at the neuropharmacology department and worked with Kew Garden. So I kind of understood more about working with scientific institutions there. And then moving into my PhD, which is very focused on astronomy, I kind of used that knowledge to approach places like observatories and things like that. And then I mentioned before Supercollider, which is an art and science organisation that has allowed me to meet a lot of different scientists and also visit interesting places like Kew Observatory and various different physics laboratories. So yeah, in addition to that, kind of applying to open calls that are for art and science collaborations.
Great. I let Melanie ask you a question, Carlos. Was there anything that you might like to ask Melanie about her career or about her experience of this project, or what working with you how that might have changed her thoughts about the brain? I don't know. I don't want to put questions in your mouth, but yeah, is there anything you might want to ask her?
Yeah, it's probably something along the lines, right? So how has working in this project changed your perspective on brain imaging and ultrasound?
I think previous to this project, I'd only really put the link together with ultrasound and pregnancy. I hadn't thought about it being used in other types of medical technology. So that was one of the biggest changes in my perspective. But also, as I mentioned before, the kind of potential future impacts that ultrasound research could have in the future on society and medical research.
Great, brilliant. Okay, I think that sort of brings us to the end of this lunchtime discussion. Thank you so much, Carlos and Melanie, for joining us, telling us all about your careers and sharing the Ultra project with us. I personally, as someone who's involved in organising the Great Exhibition Road Festival, I look forward to. I'm going to be optimistic. It is going to happen. We're going to bring this to a future festival when we can run it again, hopefully next year. And it will be an amazing experience where people can get fully immersed in it. And if you guys are around that weekend, you can come talk to you guys about it. I think that would be an incredible experience. So I'm going to wrap it up there. Thank you so much, guys, for joining us and telling us your story. And for those watching live on YouTube, apologies if we were unable to get to your questions or read out your thoughts. We tried to get through as many as we could. A recording of this discussion will soon appear on the Great Exhibition Road Festival YouTube channel, so you can watch it again and share with friends or colleagues or whoever you want, really. In fact, all future live events and recorded videos from the festival will be appearing on this YouTube channel. So if you haven't done already, do follow us and you'll get a little notification when a new live event or recorded video has been posted. My colleague Holly, who's on the YouTube chat, is going to post a link to an evaluation form where you can just tell us a little bit about what you thought about this event. You can also suggest ideas for future events. So please do take, I think it's 2-3 minutes maximum, and you fill that in for us. That will be really, really useful because we're going to be running these regularly right through next year in spring and up until through the summer. So any ideas you have for topics or themes or people we might approach to appear on these sort of lunchtime chats, please do let us know in that feedback form. I think otherwise that's it from me. So thanks to everyone who tuned in. Thanks once again to Carlos and Melanie. A little virtual round of applause for them giving up their time and telling their story. And I think all that's left for me to do is wish everyone a very good Tuesday afternoon. And yeah, join us again on the Great Exhibition Road Festival YouTube channel soon for future live events exploring the collaboration and the merger between art and science. Thank you very much, everybody.